Explain the reasons why the liberal reforms, 1906 to 1914, were introduced. Factor 1. New liberalism. The main new liberals from 1908 were Herbert Asquith, Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, Chancellor, and Winston Churchill, President of the Board of Trade. They understood that poverty was not always self-inflicted and people needed support. Lloyd George, Chancellor, had visited Germany in 1908 to see their welfare system and was very impressed. He wanted something similar to be introduced in Britain. Analysis. New liberalism was important in passing reforms because new liberals held such important roles in the government that it allowed them to dictate policy and to ensure that reforms were passed. Most reforms came after 1908, after Prime Minister Bannerman, an old liberal, had died and cabinet positions changed, bringing in new liberals such as Lloyd George, who wanted to help the people of Britain. Analysis plus. However, new liberalism was limited in passing reforms, because the new liberals were still vastly outnumbered by old laissez-faire liberals who had been elected before 1906 and had not taken action to improve working-class lives and held on to their laissez-faire attitudes. Therefore, it was still very difficult to pass reforms to help the poor. Factor 2. Reports of Booth and Rowntree. Booth's statistical evidence, called The Life and Labour of the People of London, 1889, proved that 30% of East London were living below the poverty line. Joseph Rowntree, in 1901, findings which showed similar levels of poverty, 28 to 30%, in York as in London. And he drew up a poverty line, found that 20,000 people lived below this. In primary poverty, a family lacked the resources to buy basic necessities, whose families earned less than 21 shillings per week. In secondary poverty, the family had enough to stay above the poverty line, but wasted resources by drinking or gambling. Analysis. The reports of Booth and Rowntree was important in encouraging the government to pass reforms, because the surveys gave the government the statistical proof that no matter how hard people tried, they could not get themselves out of poverty. To help people, the laissez-faire attitude had to end. As the reports were based on statistics and evidence, it was difficult to argue against their conclusions. Analysis plus, however, the reports of Booth and Rowntree was limited in passing reforms because attitudes among many politicians towards laissez-faire were so deeply ingrained that even the reports of Booth and Rowntree failed to motivate them. There were many people who challenged the surveys and still believed that poverty was not widespread and that poor people wasted their money on alcohol and gambling. Factor 3. Fears over national security. When the Boer War started in 1899, the army had needed to expand rapidly, and volunteers rushed to join up. Reports suggested that at least 25% of recruits were unfit for service. It was claimed that only 2 out of 5 enlisted men remained fit for service after 2 years. For example, in Manchester, 8,000 out of the 11,000 men who volunteered had to be rejected as physically unsuitable. Analysis. This helped to pass reforms as the government worried about Britain's ability to defend itself against a stronger enemy, especially a militaristic Germany in the future. Thus, the Boer War statistics prompted many people to support reforms to protect the country. This can be clearly seen in reforms such as free school meals and medical examinations for school children in 1906, so that they could become healthy soldiers in the future. Analysis plus, however, fears over national security was limited in passing reforms because although the first social reforms introduced in 1906 were aimed at children and looked like preparation for future national security, other reforms focused on the elderly, sick, and unemployed. For instance, the old age pension reform was introduced in 1908, which would not do anything to help with the security of the nation or win a war. Factor 4. Rise of Labour. From 1900, the Labour Party was founded to represent the working classes in Parliament. Labour proposed extensive reforms such as free education, old age pensions, and unemployment benefit, which appealed to many. In 1900, Labour won only 2 seats in Parliament, but by 1906, this had risen to 29 seats. Labour also won 2 by-elections after 1906, taking seats from the Liberals. Analysis Rise of Labour was important in encouraging the government to pass reforms because David Lloyd George stated in 1906 that they must eradicate poverty or working Britain will vote Labour instead of Liberal. It was clear that Labour were gaining in popularity, and that may have convinced the Liberals to introduce social reforms because they feared losing working-class votes to Labour if they didn't. Analysis Plus, however, Rise of Labour was limited in encouraging the government to pass reforms because in the run-up to the 1906 election, very little was said about helping the poor in election promises. It was only after the death of Campbell Bannerman in 1908 that the new Liberal policy proceeded with urgency rather than any fear of Labour. This attitude is shown in the 1906 election results. Labour gained 29 MPs, while Liberals gained 397 MPs, which suggests there was no tangible threat in terms of winning an electoral majority. Factor 5. Municipal socialism. Birmingham's water supply was polluted and only supplied 3 days a week, so Joseph Chamberlain bought the waterworks and helped to clean it. He also cleared many slum houses. In Glasgow, the city water supply was taken over by the council. Fresh water was provided to parts of the city, and public parks were opened to provide access to fresh air and relaxation. Analysis. Municipal socialism was important in passing reforms because the success and popularity enjoyed in Birmingham and Glasgow raised the possibility that reforms could work on a larger national level. Therefore, municipal socialism was crucial because it provided hard evidence that what the new Liberals argued could work. If significant improvements could be made by local councils, even greater benefits could be made by the national government. Analysis Plus, however, municipal socialism was limited in passing reforms because not all councils participated in these social reforms, so if not all local councils were willing to help, it might lose some support from national government. Local councils could be seen to have done enough to help the people that the government decided their intervention, and therefore national reforms, was not necessary.